Chicago, Division Street, a freezing November night that would shake the entire city. Marcus Sullivan, 42, owner of a $3 billion real estate empire, was leaving Rosie's Diner when he saw three 8-year-old girls digging through the dumpster behind the restaurant. Dirty, starving, wearing torn clothes. One of them, Sophie, wore a small gold locket around her neck engraved with, "To my princess, Dad." Marcus went pale. His legs gave out. That locket. He'd given it to his daughter Emily 8 years earlier, on her birthday, just hours before she vanished. When he asked where the locket came from, the girl said her mother gave it to her before she died. The other two girls, Luna and Dawn, huddled around her in terror. Marcus fell to his knees on the wet asphalt, realizing he'd finally found his daughter. But the truth was even more shocking than he could imagine. The fog wrapped Chicago like a burial shroud that November evening. Rosie's Diner glowed warm in the heart of Division Street, an oasis of authenticity where Marcus Sullivan sought refuge from the ghosts of his past. It wasn't the luxury that drew him. He could afford any Michelin-starred restaurant, but the need to remember life before his daughter Emily disappeared 8 years ago on her first birthday. Fate was weaving its threads as Marcus exited through the back of the diner to avoid the paparazzi. 3 small figures moved in the shadows by the dumpster. Girls no more than 8 years old, carefully dividing stale bread found among the garbage. The tallest, with tangled black hair, broke each piece into 3 perfectly equal parts. A maternal gesture unnatural for that age, born from who knows what deprivations. It was the way that girl tilted her head that stopped Marcus's breath. Something painfully familiar in that curve of the neck, in that movement. But it was the gold locket hanging from her dirty neck that made his world collapse. An 8-pointed star with a diamond in the center, a unique piece he'd designed himself for Tiffany & Co. On the back, even without seeing it, he knew what was engraved. "To my Princess Emily, on your first birthday. Forever yours, Dad." Marcus's legs buckled. 8 years of searching, millions spent, investigators worldwide, and his daughter had always been here, in Chicago, reduced to searching for food in the trash. The girl, who introduced herself as Sophie, said she'd received the locket from her dying mother, the only valuable thing she owned. The other two, Luna with dirty blonde hair and Dawn with red curls, pressed close to her in a protective gesture that spoke of shared dangers and common survival. Marcus convinced them to enter the diner with a simple promise: sit down and eat whatever you want. Joe, the owner, watched stunned as Chicago's most reclusive billionaire escorted 3 little beggars to the best booth. On Marcus's orders, he brought everything: steaming plates of meatloaf, golden fried chicken, apple pie, chocolate cake. The girls ate like they hadn't seen real food in weeks, yet Sophie continued dividing every portion, making sure the other two had enough before touching her plate. Dr. Harrison, called urgently, pretended to be a customer while observing the obvious signs of malnutrition, the old and new bruises, Dawn's untreated respiratory infection. Marcus listened as the girls, made talkative by food and warmth, revealed fragments of their life. They lived with someone called Aunt Martha on the South Side, who kept them for the $800 monthly from the state, but treated them like slaves. When her son Derek returned from prison, they had to disappear for days, sleeping at Union Station. Dawn, the smallest and chattiest, inadvertently revealed the crucial detail. Sophie remembered nothing before age 3, but sometimes in her sleep she spoke French. Emily's nanny had been French. She sang lullabies in that language every night. While the girls devoured chocolate cake with eyes bright with wonder, Marcus discreetly took the glass Sophie had used. Lorenzo, his private investigator, immediately took it to the lab. The call came 3 hours later, while social worker Linda was taking the girls to a safe hotel. 99.97% genetic match. Sophie was Emily. His daughter was alive. The hotel gleamed with soft lights as the three girls entered the suite with wide eyes. They'd never seen such cleanliness, so much space, real beds with scented sheets. They still curled up together in the same bed, like puppies seeking warmth, while Linda watched over them from the armchair nearby. Marcus had spent the night orchestrating what would come next. Attorney Morrison prepared the documents. Dr. Coleman from Child Protective Services organized the intervention. 3 plainclothes officers watched the building on the south side. At dawn, when the city still slept, they climbed the stairs of that decrepit building that reeked of grease and misery. Martha Crawford opened the door in a bathrobe, her alcohol-ravaged face contorting in rage when she saw the warrant. The apartment was worse than Marcus had imagined. Dirty mattresses on the floor, no toys or books, an empty fridge except for moldy beer. But the real horror was in the basement, an improvised cell with scratches on the walls and desperate writings where they locked up the bad girls. Derek Crawford emerged from the bedroom in a tank top, tattoos covering a body accustomed to violence. While officers cuffed him for parole violation, Martha broke down. Through hysterical screams, she revealed the truth. Someone named Veronica Ross, former nanny for a rich family, had brought Sophie 8 years ago, paying her $1,000 a month to keep her without asking questions. Veronica Ross, a fake name for Veronique Rousseau, Emily's French nanny. The girls were still sleeping when Marcus returned to the hotel. Linda had watched all night, reporting that Sophie had woken several times calling Maman in French, with Luna and Dawn cradling her while singing Southern lullabies. They were a family, united not by blood, but by shared survival. Marcus's decision was immediate. He couldn't separate them. The Sullivan mansion in Lincoln Park had 20 empty rooms since Helen died. There was space for 3 girls who needed a home, safety, love. Attorney Morrison began temporary custody proceedings for Luna and Dawn while confirming Emily's paternity. The moment of truth came in the afternoon. Marcus knelt before Sophie, showing her the engraving on the back of the locket. He explained gently that her real name was Emily Sullivan, that she'd been kidnapped 8 years ago, that he'd searched for her every single day. The girl trembled, the other 2 clinging to her, as she processed the impossible truth. She remembered nothing, only fragments of dreams. A big house, a woman singing in French, a man throwing her in the air and making her laugh. It was when Marcus spoke of Helen, of the mother who died of heartbreak 5 years after the kidnapping, that Emily broke down. 8 years of forced survival melted into desperate tears as she clung to this unknown yet strangely familiar father. Luna and Dawn cried with her, united in a pain they knew too well, that of abandonment, of loss, of stolen life. The revelations that emerged during interrogations painted an even darker picture. Martha Crawford ran a virtual child exploitation center, taking vulnerable children to pocket state subsidies. Luna and Dawn's documents were all forged. Luna didn't come from an orphanage, but had literally been bought from traffickers. Dawn hadn't been abandoned. Her 15-year-old mother had her taken away because she was deemed unfit. The search of the apartment revealed other horrors. Notebooks, where Martha recorded punishments and deprivations like an accounting ledger. Photos of other children who'd passed through, disappeared, who knows where. A network of complicity involving corrupt social workers and compliant officials. But for Marcus, all that mattered were his girls. He'd taken them to the Sullivan mansion, where they stood petrified on the threshold. The Victorian mansion gleamed in the morning sun like something out of a fairy tale, too beautiful to be true. They chose to sleep together in a single suite, despite the 20 available rooms. The first night, Marcus found them curled up in the same bed, Emily in the center, Luna and Dawn on the sides like sentinels. The physical transformation was rapid. With proper food, medical care, clean clothes, The girls blossomed like plants after rain, but the trauma ran deep. They hid food in their pockets for later. They stiffened at sudden noises. Emily obsessively checked that the others were okay, waking at night to make sure they were still breathing. Dr. Matthews, Chicago's best child psychologist, worked with them for months. Individual and group sessions, art therapy, EMDR, to process the trauma. Slowly, painfully, the girls began to trust, to believe this new life wasn't a dream from which they'd be violently awakened. Marcus discovered he was father not to one, but 3 daughters. Luna showed sharp intelligence and a natural talent for mathematics that amazed the private tutors. Dawn, once her respiratory infection was cured, revealed a crystal voice and artistic talent that filled the mansion with colorful drawings. And Emily? Emily began to remember. Fragments at first. The smell of the garden that seemed familiar. A lullaby that came spontaneously. The way Marcus laughed that awakened distant echoes. The Chicago International School welcomed them with a special program. At first, they went and returned holding hands, a cord of mutual protection. The other children, sons of diplomats and entrepreneurs, looked at them curiously, but not hostilely. They gradually integrated, though at recess they always sought each other with their eyes, making sure all were safe. One evening during dinner, Marcus insisted on always dining together. Came the question he feared. Dawn, with her disarming honesty, asked if they were really safe, or if one day he'd send them back. Marcus's answer was a gift. 3 gold lockets, similar to Emily's. For Luna, a moon with a sapphire. For Dawn, a sun with a ruby. On the back of each the same engraving. To my princesses, forever yours, Dad. The girls were speechless, then rose like a wave and overwhelmed him with hugs. For the first time, Emily called him Dad. A simple word containing 8 years of absence and a lifetime of promises. Winter gave way to spring, as the Sullivan mansion came back to life. The corridors that for years had echoed only with silence now resounded with children's laughter. The garden, once perfect and sterile, had become a realm of games and adventures. The indoor pool, unused since Helen's death, now hosted swimming lessons and water battles. Marcus had learned to braid Luna's hair, to understand when Dawn was about to have an anxiety-induced asthma attack, to recognize when Emily withdrew into herself, overwhelmed by fragmented memories surfacing.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
He'd become expert in nightmares, in irrational fears that were perfectly rational for those who'd lived what they'd lived. The breakthrough came during a family therapy session. Dr. Matthews had asked the girls to draw their family. Luna drew 4 figures holding hands under a huge sun. Dawn filled the page with colored hearts, with the 4 of them in the center. But it was Emily's drawing that made Marcus cry. She'd drawn 2 overlapping images, a family in darkness and one in light, connected by a bridge made of plates of food. The search for truth continued in parallel. Lorenzo had tracked down Veronique Rousseau to a Swiss hospice, dying of cancer. Marcus went alone, leaving the girls with Linda. The woman was a shadow of herself, consumed by illness and remorse. Her confession was heartbreaking. She hadn't kidnapped Emily, but Veronica Ross, a maid obsessed with Marcus. Veronique had tried to stop her but was blackmailed. When Veronica died in an accident 2 days after the kidnapping, Veronique had taken Emily, traumatized and mute, to her sister in Detroit. But fear of being arrested had driven her to leave the child with Martha Crawford, whom she knew from cleaning jobs, paying her for silence. There was more. Veronique knew the truth about Luna and Dawn, too. Luna had an aunt in New York searching for her for years. Her father was a political prisoner in Haiti. Dawn had a biological mother in Memphis, who'd had her at 15 and had her taken away by social services. Both families were still searching for them. Marcus returned to Chicago tormented. He watched his three daughters doing homework together, Emily helping Luna with English, Dawn humming while coloring, and wondered if he had the right to keep them together when they had biological families searching for them. But then he saw how they looked for each other, with their eyes when one left the room, even just for the bathroom, how they still slept in the same bed despite having separate rooms, how they instinctively protected each other. The decision was made with Attorney Morrison and Dr. Coleman. They would search for the biological families, evaluate them, and then let the girls decide, with all necessary psychological support. They were 9 now, old enough to have a say in their future. The meeting with biological families was organized with obsessive care at juvenile court. Marie Toussaint, Luna's aunt, had come from New York where she worked as a nurse at Mount Sinai. A 35-year-old woman with the same gentle eyes as Luna, who'd cried for hours when she learned her niece was alive. She had papers in order, a stable job, a small, clean apartment. She'd searched for Luna for 6 years before giving up. Ashley Williams, Dawn's biological mother, was 24 now. She'd been only 15 when Dawn was born, too young and poor according to social services. She'd rebuilt her life in Memphis, married to a good man, mother of another child, but she'd never stopped searching for her firstborn, fighting against a system that had judged her unfit just for age and poverty. The meetings were supervised by Dr. Matthews. Luna and Marie studied each other with the caution of 2 cats. They resembled each other in features, in the way they tilted their heads, even in the way they laughed. Marie told of Haiti, of Luna's father unjustly imprisoned for his political ideas, of the mother who died of grief. She showed photos of a large united family, destroyed by politics and violence. The meeting between Dawn and Ashley was more emotional. The young woman cried, asking forgiveness for not being strong enough to keep her. Dawn, with surprising maturity for her 9 years, took her hand and said she understood. It wasn't her fault. They studied each other in detail. Same red curls, same freckles on the nose, same way of biting their lip when nervous. But when it came time to decide, the girls were unanimous. They wanted to know their biological families, wanted to know where they came from. But their home was with Marcus and with each other. They were sisters not by blood, but by survival, united by bonds no DNA could explain. The solution came from the wisdom of Judge Patterson. An open adoption. Marcus would legally adopt Luna and Dawn, but biological families would maintain visitation rights. They would be aunts who come to visit, who tell stories of origins, who keep the link with roots alive without breaking the new bonds created. On the day of the final hearing, the courtroom was packed. Marcus in a dark suit, the 3 girls in simple but elegant clothes. They'd insisted on not looking too rich. When the judge asked them what they wanted, Emily stood and spoke for all. She told how they'd found each other in the dark, how they'd protected each other, how they'd divided breadcrumbs when that was all they had. She told how Marcus had saved them with a simple, "Sit down and eat whatever you want," and how those words had been the beginning of a new life. The judge's gavel sanctioned what the heart already knew. They were a family, not conventional, not traditional, but real and solid as the foundations of the Sullivan mansion. 5 years had passed since that night on Division Street. Rosie's diner glowed warm in the Chicago evening as 3 14-year-old teenagers laughed around a table, celebrating their 8th grade graduation with straight A's. Emily talked about wanting to study law to help children like they had been. Luna dreamed of medicine, inspired by Aunt Marie, who visited every month from New York. Dawn had just won a national art competition and talked about the Art Institute. Marcus watched them with infinite pride. They were no longer the skeletal girls digging through garbage. They were confident, brilliant, compassionate young women. But they maintained some habits from the past. They still often slept in the same room, sought each other with their eyes in every moment of uncertainty, divided everything into perfectly equal parts by instinct. The 3 Stars Foundation, created by Marcus in their honor, had already saved hundreds of street children. The girls actively participated, going to orphanages, foster homes, bringing not just material aid, but their story of hope. They knew how to talk to those children because they had been them. They knew what it meant to be hungry, to be afraid, to trust no one. That evening at the diner, a man in shabby clothes approached their table with two small children. Before he could speak, the three girls had already stood up. They recognized in those children's eyes the same desperation they'd had. Without hesitation, they seated the family, called Joe, ordered the entire menu. Marcus watched with a swollen heart as his daughters took care of those strangers with the naturalness of those who know what it means to be saved. Emily cut the meat for the children. Luna poured water. Dawn made funny faces to make them laugh. They'd become what the world had denied them: protectors, saviors, angels for other lost children. The story of how a billionaire had found his daughter in a dumpster had become legend in Chicago. But the real story, the one that mattered, was simpler and deeper. It was the story of how three broken girls had held together strong enough not to shatter completely. Of how a father had found not one, but three daughters. Of how a family can be born not from blood, but from the choice to love, despite everything. The Sullivan mansion was no longer a mausoleum of memories, but a living home, full of music and laughter. Helen's photos smiled from the walls, next to those of the three girls at every stage of their new life. In the garden, an oak tree planted on Adoption Day had grown strong and lush, its branches intertwined like the lives it protected. Marie came from New York every month, bringing stories of Haiti and teaching Luna the traditions of her land. Ashley visited from Memphis with her husband and young son, creating an extended family where Dawn had found a little brother who adored her. Even Marie Rousseau, Veronique's sister, came from France occasionally, bringing the forgiveness and closure everyone needed. On the evening of their 18th birthday, celebrated together because they'd chosen to share that date too, Marcus gave his final gift: 3 letters from Helen, written before she died, one for each daughter she would have wanted to have. She didn't know her husband would find exactly 3 girls in need of love, but fate had its plans. The letters spoke of courage, of hope, of how true love knows no blood bonds. Helen, from her deathbed, had written words that seemed prophetic. Love as if you'd never been hurt. Give as if nothing had ever been taken from you. Live as if every day were a miracle. Because it is. Beatty, that night, while Chicago slept, 3 young women and their father stood in the Sullivan mansion garden, under the stars. They held hands in a circle, as they'd done 1,000 times over the years. No words were needed. The silence said everything. Gratitude for surviving, for finding each other, for choosing to be family. In the distance, the city gleamed with lights. Somewhere, other children were suffering as they had suffered. But somewhere, there was also hope. Because if 3 girls digging through trash could become this, loved, safe, ready to save others, then anything was possible. Rosie's diner continued serving its steaming plates. Joe, aged but still smiling, always kept a booth free. You never knew when someone would need to hear, "Sit down and eat whatever you want." Because sometimes salvation begins with a plate of meatloaf. Sometimes love hides in a gold locket found by chance. Sometimes a family is born not from blood, but from the decision not to let go of the hands that held you in the dark. And always, always, miracles happen when someone has the courage to say, "You're safe now. You're home." Marcus Sullivan knew it well. He'd lost 1 daughter to find 3. He'd cried for a ghost only to embrace 3 warriors. He'd searched for Emily all over the world to find her 2 blocks from home. With 2 sisters fate had given her as compensation for the stolen years. The story ends here, but really it continues every day. In the courtrooms where Emily defends minors, in the hospitals where Luna treats sick children, In the galleries where Dawn exhibits paintings that speak of rebirth, and in the Sullivan mansion, where Marcus ages peacefully, surrounded by grandchildren who call all three of his daughters aunts, who know the dumpster story as a fairy tale of hope. Because this isn't just the story of a father who finds his daughter. It's the story of how true love doesn't need DNA, of how family is chosen, of how three hungry girls became three women who feed the world, and it all began with 5 simple words, spoken one November night in the Chicago fog. Sit down and eat whatever you want. 5 words that changed 4 lives forever. If this story touched your heart, hit like. If you believe family is more than blood, comment. If you think every child deserves a second chance, share. Because somewhere, right now, 3 girls are searching in the dark, and somewhere, a father is searching for his light.